Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Dirty Gaming, and what hopefully is a super quick all-in-one guide for new players who want to pick up Path of Exile. If there's certain things you want me to expand on, let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to make new videos. So let's jump right into it without wasting any time. Your first job is to pick your class and your name. Name, whatever you like, doesn't matter. Class, important. Classes in their vanilla form are pretty much identical. You don't have anything specific on any of these classes other than slightly different attribute spreads. The only difference is you'll access certain gems in the first 5 acts on some classes and not on others. Where class becomes important is what's called Ascendancy, which are subclasses of your class. You unlock them normally around Act 3 to 4, and throughout the game you'll be able to put more points into your Ascendancy up to a maximum of 8. Certain skills work much better on certain Ascendancies, so before you even pick your build, your Ascendancy, whatever you want to do, just spend a couple of minutes checking out the PoE wiki just to get an idea of what you might want to go for. However, as a rule of thumb, if you just want to jump straight in, if you want to go a bow attack build, you pick Ranger. If you want to go melee, you go Duelist or Marauder. If you want to go spells, then you'd go Witch or Inquisitor. Mines and traps, you go on a Shadow. Minions on Necromancer. There's obviously lots of other combos and skills I've missed out, but as a general rule of thumb, you can't really go wrong if you follow that pathing. So you progress through the game. The first thing you really need to get introduced to and understand is the skill gem system. The first thing you're going to do when you start the game is you kill an enemy and it drops a gem, which will slot into your weapon. Skill gems are essentially the only way, bar a few uniques, that you can actually get skills into the game. There is no pathing or tree that gives you skills. They all come from gems. If you don't put them in, you'll just basically have a default attack. The two types of gems that you get that actually affect your skills directly are your active skill gem and then what's called support gems. So a skill gem will give you a skill. Let's say, for example, I'm a ranger. The first skill I pick up is Burning Arrow. I'll slot that into my bow. I have Burning Arrow. Then halfway through the first zone, I get a support gem, Momentum Support, that adds some buffs to that skill, but it has to be linked to it and socketed in the same item as that gem. We put our skill gem in, we put our support gem in, and that is our skill ready to go. That's really all you need to know about the system. Your skill gems will get supported by support gems, but they will only get that support gem if they are linked in the same item. It's no good having just the sockets, they need to be linked as well. So while we're on the subject of support gems, you are going to get both skill and support gems offered an abundance of them within the game. Some skill gems work really, really well early game. Some are pretty dreadful. So I would just recommend looking to see what maybe people play early on, because there are some skills that just do not work as a leveling skill. Outside of that, I would concentrate on one skill. So if you decide you want to play a spell character, pick one spell that you use as your damage skill. It's much easier to build around, your tree becomes much easier, and the playstyle becomes easier. So as a rule of thumb, once you get progressing through to Act 5 or 6, I would look to have any build you do set up in this way. You have one set of links and a main support gem for your main skill that's going to do damage. You'll have another set of gems for auras, which buff you. And I have another set of gems for a curse to debuff the enemy. Another setup for defenses and a movement skill. And then lastly, if you have other sockets, you might do a secondary damage gem, but you don't want something that means you're not using your main skill. So this might be something that just does damage on its own. It could be a totem, it could be a trap, it could be a brand, or it could be something that does damage over time that you only have to hit out very often. A really good example of this is my League Start build that I bought out last league for Rain of Arrows. I had my main skill, which was Rain of Arrows. Then in a secondary skill, I had the same skill, but put into a totem. So I put the totems down and then they do damage on their own. And I don't have to worry about those totems again. I'm then free to do damage. It just gives me more damage on single target. But these are probably things you only need to put down at bosses. So that's a super quick run through. That's how I would look to do your skill gems. Don't go, I've been given Burning Arrow, Lightning Arrow, Rain of Arrows, Lightning Strike. I'm going to put all these things in and try and use all these gems, because they'll all just do very little damage, and you also can't use them all at the same time. So just focus on one skill and boost up that skill, debuff enemies, buff yourself, and everything combined gives you decent amounts of damage. So next thing we're going to talk about very quickly is the different type of currencies that you're going to get through the campaign. Now, we'll say firstly, most of these currencies are better off saving them for the second half of the game, or a lot of them are used for your crafting bench, and they're much better off used in the crafting bench than trying to craft items. But I will go through them one by one to make sure you understand generally what they do. All these that we're going to go through, you should find in the first 5 acts, and they'll get more common as you get through to the end of the game. So the first 2 things to look at are scrolls. You get scrolls of wisdom, which identify items, and you get portal scrolls that give you a portal back to a main town. Any items that you get dropped that aren't just normal are mostly unidentified, and you need to use a scroll of wisdom to identify that item to see what stats are on it and to be able to actually use the item. An orb of transmutation turns a normal item like this one into a magic item. Magic items can have up to 1 prefix and 1 suffix and no more. As you can see from this one, it has rolled 1 suffix. This is a common item for crafts, so I would keep it to use on your crafting bench. Next, you've got Orb of Augmentation, which gives another mod to a magic item if it only has 1 mod on it. This has rolled just 1 suffix, so I can use an Orb of Augmentation to add a prefix to that item. You get 2 quality items. Again, I would not use these at all during the campaign because you're going to be replacing your gear fairly regularly, but whetstones are used in some vendor crafts that you might want to look at. But overall, a blacksmith's whetstone adds quality to a weapon, and a scrap gives quality to armor. The only thing you really need to understand about these is if you use them on a white item, it gives you 5% of the quality. If you use it on a magic, it gives you 2, and if you use it on rare, it only gives you 1%. So if you had a rare item, you wanted to get to 20%, it takes 20 of the currency. Essentially, whetstones give you physical damage to a weapon, and armor scraps increase the base values of your armor in regards to its evasion, its strength, and its intelligence. You get chromatic orbs, which recolor the sockets on items. Alterations change the mods on your magic item, so if you use it here, you can see it changes the stats. Orb of Chance, I would not use at all in the campaign unless you need it to buy a gem. They turn a normal item into a random rarity, which could be magic, rare, or even sometimes unique. Jeweler's Orbs and Fusings are used for socket-related craft, so a Jeweler's Orb will reroll the number of sockets randomly on an item up to the maximum you have available. An example would be this is item level 35, so the max it can roll is 5 sockets, so it will not allow me to roll over this. Links will link the sockets. So whatever sockets you have on this, it will put random links onto those. This can roll over the maximum unless you're going for 6 links. If I rolled this to 4 links and then use the fuse in, it will re-roll the links. Mainly because you might want to have these 2 gems linked together and these 2 gems here, so it allows you to override the maximum. You have a Scouring Orb, which again I won't really use in the campaign. This removes all the modifiers from an item and takes it back to white, like this. A Vile Orb corrupts an item. So what it will do is it will either keep the item as it is, modify its stats entirely, or it can actually give you special attributes that don't turn up on normal items. You would not use this at all in the campaign. And then Orb of Regret, you can use 1 orb to refund 1 point on the tree, yet just 1 point per orb. And considering that at the end of the game you've got over 100 points, if you want to respect your whole tree, it's 100 of these orbs. They're quite rare to drop, and you have to pay currency to buy them off other players if you wanted them. The Orb of Alchemy is the one I use mostly in the campaign, and this turns a normal into a rare. The reason you might do this is if you're running an attack-based build and you've still got your bog standard weapon that you had in the campaign, you might want to get a better weapon. So let's say for this particular build, it's a 2-handed axe build, and this is the axe I've got and it's got no mods on it. If I use an Orb of Alchemy, it makes it rare. And now if I'm playing an elemental attack build, I've actually just increased my damage an absolute ton. I've got decent fire damage, decent lightning damage, attack speed, and crit. So now I've upped my damage a hell of a lot by using that Orb of Alchemy. So that kind of covers off the currency. And like I say, other than obviously scrolls, I don't really use much in the campaign because I'll just work with the gear that drops. And I know these currencies are going to be more worthwhile later on or for crafting important mods onto my items. The only thing I quickly want to cover off when we come to sockets is the color of your sockets is sort of dependent on the type of stats you have on the item. So you get 3 types of items in Path of Exile: strength, dexterity, and intelligence. Strength will give armor, dexterity will give evasion, and intelligence will give energy shield. These stats determine the likelihood of what the colors of your sockets are. The more strength you have on an item, the more likely it is to roll a red socket, the more dexterity green, and intelligence blue. So this item has 43 strength, 43 dexterity, and 0 intelligence, which means it's unlikely to roll blue sockets and is much more likely to roll red and green, as you can see from here, because they're all green and red. So if we use one of these chromatic orbs, as you can see, it's rolled as expected, really, 3 greens, 2 reds. It's not to say you're not going to roll blue sockets, you're just very unlikely to roll a lot of them. If you picked up this and you were like, this is what I need, but I need it to be 4 blue sockets, early on in the game, don't even bother. You are very, very unlikely to get 4 blue sockets on this item, especially because these currencies will be in fairly short supply. So now we'll move on to the skill tree. So the skill tree is not something where you're going to get buffs to specific skills, but you're going to get buffs to archetypes. And that's the easiest way to describe the skill tree is if you want a character that's going to have tons and tons of life and defenses, you can go off and spec into all life and defense nodes. If you want something that's a super glass cannon, not bothered about life, and you want attack, you can go and just go into all the attack nodes or spell nodes, whatever it is that you want to do. But it's much, much better to build a balanced character. Always make sure you attribute quite a decent chunk of your tree to life and defenses, because the main thing that people fall over on when they get to the end of the game, they've killed Act 10 Guitar and they start going into maps, they have not picked up any life or defense nodes on the tree. They've gone all damage. They've got no life, no defenses, no resistances, and they just get annihilated in maps and end up having to abandon the character because it's just too far gone to fix. If you're not following a build, use the search function in the tree to help you understand where you want to go, because respecing is difficult in Path of Exile and costly. It could be that you go so wrong that you can't actually fix your character. So use the search function. If you're a spell build, search spell damage. If it's a lightning spell, search lightning damage, life, block, whatever you want to do defense-wise, offense-wise, use that search function. If you're really unsure, there's a website called PoE Ninja where you can put any skill in the game that someone's using and it will give you the nodes that most people path to, and that could give you some idea. If you wanted to build your own character, it gives you an idea of what other people do. So I'm not going to spend much more time on a skill tree other than explain that you basically get 3 different types of nodes. You get small travel nodes, which will either be 10 to an attribute or a small amount to a specific skill. You get your major notables, which normally give a big boost, but are always needed to go through a couple of small travel nodes to get there. And then once you get to a notable, you can unlock what's called a mastery, where for 1 point, you can pick one of the masteries that lie within those notables. Now, there's other things like jewel sockets, cluster jewels, things like that, but I really don't want to touch on them yet because they're a bit more advanced. Same with keystones. If you're following and making your own guide, keystones are very unlikely to come into it. But keystones are essentially something that will affect your build in its entirety. So one keystone, for example, point blank, makes your projectile damage do 30% more if the travel distance is super short. But if you're a screen length away from the enemy, you'll do much, much less damage. So now we're going to come on to gear. This is quite an important part, but again, I'm going to try and speed through it as quickly as possible. First thing I want to talk about is weapons. If you are playing an attack-based build, all of your damage, all of your crit chance, all of your attack speed scales from your weapon. If you have a rubbish weapon, your build is going to feel very, very bad. If you get lucky and get an amazing weapon early on, your build is going to feel really good because every boost that you give to your attack gets added on to the base stats of your weapon, which if it's already good, just increases that damage even more. Spells work differently. They in general level from the gem level itself. So if we take Arc, for example, the more levels you get into the skill, the more flat lightning damage that skill does. You can then get things that, plus to gem levels from gear to boost Arc even more. So your weapon comes into it and you can get spell damage, cast speed, flat damage to spells, but it's just on its own. It doesn't scale with the spell skill gem like the attack builds do. So that's why a lot of people will choose spells as their first playthrough because it's much less gear dependent. If you're playing an attack build and you get unlucky for whatever reason and in the first 3 acts you don't find any crafting materials or weapons, you are really going to struggle to get through that 3rd act. Whereas if you are a spell build, just from that spell gem alone, it might be a slog without any other gear, but you're going to get through it and it's going to be fairly comfortable. And outside of your weapon, really all you want to get on your gear is life and resistances. Do not worry about anything else through the campaign. Capping your resistances is the most important thing. Now, you're not going to be able to do it realistically in Act 1 or 2, or even maybe Act 3. all I would look to do is by the end of Act 3, beginning of Act 4, have all your elemental resistances at 75% apart from chaos. And a tip for this is you will unlock your crafting bench really early on. From level 20 onwards, for one orb of transmutation, you can craft 20% to any of the elemental resistances onto an item. So if, for example, you are 40% short on fire, but you're capped on the others, and you've got open suffixes on your gear, you can craft fire damage on the crafting bench, and that will just help you stay alive much, much more in the campaign. While we're on the topic of resistances, when you kill the Act 5 boss, and then again you kill that boss in Act 10, each time you will lose 30% of your maximum resistances. So if you were 75%, you will go down to 45%. If you were then 45% when you kill the Act 10 boss, you're going to go down to 15%. If you do struggle, there is an aura called Purity of Elements that you can run that gives you resistances. It is probably not something I recommend unless you have to, because damage auras carry a lot of your damage early on in the game. But if you really struggle and you're getting killed because you've just got no resistances, it is a good way to patch that up in the short term. In terms of links, you will not get any better than 3 socketed, 3 linked items in the first 2 acts. That's the most it can drop. So don't try to get a 4 socket item or a 4 link item. They don't exist in the first 2 acts. When you get to Act 3 and you get to level 25, that's when vendors can start selling 4 link and 4 socket items, and they can start dropping from enemies. Then once you get sort of level 35 to 40, you can get 5 link and 6 links, but they're very, very rare, and don't go chasing them. Most people will have 4 links all the way through the campaign until they get to maps. So the goal in Act 3 and 4, which is a really important transition part of the game, is get some 4 links that fit the gems that you want to use. And you just don't have to upgrade those items all the way through the game. Once you've got your links sorted, use the other items that you have to get your resistances, your life, and your damage, so that you don't spend absolutely ages in every act rebalancing your gear, looking for upgrades. Once you've got your links sorted, you're good to go. And if you're making a half decent build or you're following a decent guide, you shouldn't need to do any more than that. So we're now going to talk about probably the most important part of the game and the build to understand, and that's Ascendancies. So as mentioned at the beginning of the guide, within each class, they have different ascendancies that you can choose as you go throughout the game, but you can only pick one. To unlock these ascendancies, you need to go to what's called the Aspirants Plaza, which is accessible through Act 3 at the start of the game, and then later on you can teleport there directly. What's going to happen as you progress through raid class is you're going to come into zones, and they're going to have trials that you have to complete. You go through a door, you run through the trial, you complete it, and then you hit a plaque at the end, and it will give you part of the key to get into the Aspirants Plaza. In Act 1, 2, and 3, there's a total of 6 trials that you need to complete. Once you've completed them all, you're going to get a quest pop up to ask you to complete your labyrinth. You're going to go to Act 3, you're going to go through this door to the Aspirants Plaza, get the waypoint so that you can then just waypoint there in the future, and then you're going to come up to this activation device and you're going to do your first labyrinth. When you get through to the end, you're going to have an option to ascend. So I, on this character, am a ranger. I would have the option of a Deadeye, a Pathfinder, or a Raider. For this particular character, I've gone Deadeye, and I've taken Gathering Wind, which gives me more movement speed, more action speed, more attack speed, and just generally makes me much quicker. Then, as I get through to later on in the game, in Acts 7 and 8, I'm going to complete 3 more trials, and I'm going to get another message pop up asking me to go back and ascend again. You're then going to go and pick the second labyrinth from the activation device, which is Crawl Lab. You're going to run through again, and it's going to give you another 2 points. So in these 2 points, I went to Ricochet, which makes my skills chain an additional time. Then in Act 10, you're going to have completed 3 more trials, and yet again, it's going to ask you to go back and ascend. This time, you'll go and do the Merciless Lab. Again, you get all the way through, complete it, and then it gives you 2 more points. In a campaign, you can only get 6 points. The remaining 2 will come from what you pick up in maps. You'll pick up something called an Offering of the Goddess, which you can either get through a trial that you find in a map, or you might randomly get them to drop in the ground. You need that offering to get into the Eternal Lab. Without it, it won't let you in, and then that will give you the last 2 points that you need. I haven't done it on this particular character, so then I would pick whatever Ascendancy points I wanted to next. So early on in the game, you're going to start experiencing old league mechanics. The main two that you're going to come across in the first 5 acts are Bestiary, which will be beasts that appear on maps, and a character called Ino will turn up and help you kill these beasts. And then you get Essences, which are monsters that are imprisoned, and when they get busted out and you kill them, they drop an essence that can be used for crafting. Essences are super important early game. Any essence monster I would try and kill, even if it takes you a minute to kill that monster, or in softcore you take a couple of deaths. They can really, really help progress your character quickly. Bestiary, I would ignore it, to be honest. They're quite tanky, quite difficult, and early on you are going to spend a lot of time killing these for what might be no reward. But Essences I would always do throughout your playthrough. When you hit the second part of the game, which is Act 6 to 10, you're going to start coming across lots more league mechanics. First one you're probably going to come across is Heist. You will get something dropped called Rogue Markers and Contracts. When you get your first lot of Rogue Markers, it's going to trigger a quest, and you'll basically go to a place called the Rogue Harbour and complete an intro quest. I would recommend doing that because it gives you a general overview of what Heist is, and really from that first contract you'll get an idea of whether it's something you like to do. If not, you can ignore it for the rest of your playthrough. If it is something you like, then it's something you can do throughout Acts 5 to 10 as you find more Rogue Markers and more contracts. The next one you're likely to come across is Expedition. This again will explain what you need to do. It's fairly straightforward. Again, once you've done a couple, they're all very much the same. If it's something you like, carry on doing it. If it's not, forget about it. And then the last one you're going to come across, which you're probably going to have to tackle, is Syndicate. And these are monsters that basically invade your map every now and again, or invade your zone. And there's 3 different types of encounters you can complete. And they drop items that you can unveil special crafts on that you can only get from these characters. So it's something I would recommend doing whenever it turns up. And then that's kind of it for the campaign. There is obviously lots more nuances to the whole game overall, but that's kind of the general gist of it. Understand the skill gem system, understand links, understand how to path on your tree, what skills you want to use, and get a very, very basic grasping of the older league mechanics if you want to. The only other thing to mention is you're also going to get something called flasks that drop. So it's not like other ARPGs where you just get a life flask. There are lots and lots of utility flasks that you can get in the game. So you get offered these as a reward. So pick the ones that fit your build. If you're running a melee armor character, pick the flask that gives you more armor. If you're playing an evasive bow character, pick the flask that gives you evasion. If you're playing a crit character, pick the flask that gives you more critical strike chance. Now these will drop much, much more frequently later in the game. So don't worry if you make a wrong decision. You will get multiple of every type of flask drop at some point in the game. So it's not something to stress about too much. Now, this video could go on for another hour, but I want to keep it nice and short. All I would say is there are lots of recipes that you can use in the game when you're leveling to craft items, but they vary depending on the build that you are playing. So I would recommend using the official PoE wiki to decide whether you want to do that, because you can just look at ones that are relevant to your build. So if you are an attack character with a melee weapon, you can look at what recipes you might be able to use. Same as the essences. Each essence adds a different stat to your item. So if you are a physical weapon build, your best essence to use is going to be one that adds physical damage to a weapon. But this is, its own video for each section. So I would just, for now, as your first playthrough, just go through it. If you then decide you do want to know more, just use the wiki. It's really, really useful. Search Reddit, search the forums for things like that, because there will be posts about everything. So that's kind of it for the campaign and your first playthrough. Take your time. Make sure you pay attention to your skill tree because respec options are limited. Try and focus on one skill and just generally get an understanding and feel for the game. So the last 2 closing tips I will give is do not worry how long it takes you as long as you are enjoying the game. Leagues go on for 3 months and most of the time people give up after a month. You don't need to worry about speeding through content because you have got 3 months to get what you want done. And as a beginner, it might just be, I want to get into maps and give the map system a test. You've got plenty of time to do that, even if it takes you 40 hours to get through the campaign. Secondly, don't be afraid if you want to give up your character and start another one. I think the fun of this game is trying different classes and doing different things. If you do get to a point where either you're bored with your character or it just doesn't work and it's too much work to respec it, don't feel bad about starting a new character. I think I restarted 4 times before I finally found a character that I was happy with to take me through to maps. As long as you're enjoying the game, that's all that matters. So that's it for this video. There's going to be more detailed videos breaking down each part as we go along. This was just hopefully a general overview that you can use to just watch 15 minutes before you play the game and hopefully end you up in a really good position. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and see you in the next one.